Okay, so I'm back. It's Unseen Warfare. Hope everybody's all right. I was gonna. I guess I'm a little late. I don't know. So what I'm gonna cover is the why the true Orthodox are truly Orthodox. So I'm gonna get into this. Okay, so the paper is entitled "Why the True Orthodox Are Truly Orthodox." It's a rejoinder to a Father Basil uh, Gregorites and an apology for the breaking communion with ecumenist bishops by Bishop Maximus Moretta. Okay, it says, in every age the devil tempts the faithful by various means, persecutions, foreign invasions, the lure of wildly seduction or worldly seductions rather. Among his most effective snares are heresy and schism, which by separating Christians from the church led them away from Christ and into spiritual deception and apostasy. Long is the list of heresies which have tried the church over the centuries. Arianism, Nestorianism, Monophytism, Iconoclasm, Papism, Protestantism, and many others. In our day, a new heresy has appeared which seeks to bring all these together, and for this reason is aptly referred to as the pan-heresy, uh, as a pan-heresy. Quote, this is ecumenism, which we may briefly define as the belief that the sects which the church had previously considered heretical and cut off from her are in fact in some way still part of her. The threat ecumenism poses to the church is perhaps greater than that of any heresy of the past, for two reasons. First, by far the larger part of the church has succumbed to this temptation. Second, the effects of ecumenism is to negate the underlying conception of, quote, orthodoxy and heresy as the church has understood them from her inception. Um, you know, I'm kind of off right now. Like, okay, let's, let's see. What, what are we doing? Okay, there we go. What's up, man?
Yo, what's up?
How you doing? So yeah, so I'm reading from this paper, and basically it's like a refutation of a few points that they make. And now that I'm looking at it, I may be able to like pull this up real quick. So that's probably what I'm gonna do. All right. So what's been going on, man?
Nothing really.
Okay. Let's see if I can find a copy of this. Okay, yeah, here it is. Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna present this. I have a different copy of this, but it's the same, I believe. Yeah, it's the same. So it says, This, I'm going to restart since people have the link in front of them and can see it. So it says, in every age the devil tempts the faithful by various means, persecutions, foreign invasions, the lure of worldly seduction. Among his most effective snares are heresy and schism, which by separating Christians from the church led them away from the Christ and into spiritual deception and apostasy. Long is the list of heresies which have tried the church over the centuries: Arianism, Nestorianism, Monophytism, Iconoclasm, Papism, Protestantism, and many others. In our day, a new heresy has arisen which seeks to bring all these together. For this reason, it is aptly referred to as, quote, pan-heresy. This is ecumenism, which we may briefly define as the belief that sects which the Church has previously considered heretical and cut off from her are, in fact, in some ways still part of her. The threat ecumenism poses to the Church is perhaps greater than that of any heresy of the past, for two reasons. First, by far, the largest part of the Church has succumbed to its temptation. Second, the effects of ecumenism is to negate the underlying conception of, quote, orthodoxy and, quote, heresy as the Church has understood them from her very inception. Despite the spread of ecumenism in most local churches, a remnant of faithful has remained steadfast in orthodoxy. Um, okay. These faithful Christians are known as the True Orthodox, or the, quote, traditionalist Orthodox, or sometimes as the, quote, Old Calendarists. The latter name is used because one of the first manifestations of ecumenism was the change of the Church's liturgical calendar to correspond to that of the Papists and the Protestants. Since the papal calendar has long been condemned by the Church, the Orthodox rejected it. When the new calendarists adopted it, and they severed communion with the bishops who promoted it. Nearly as disturbing as the heresy of ecumenism itself is the fact that many individuals with otherwise orthodox beliefs have remained under ecumenist bishops. Even though they vigorously disagree with these bishops on matters of faith, for the sake of convenience, we may style these individuals as, quote, conservative new calendarists, although perhaps they would be better described as, quote, conservative adherents of world orthodoxy, since many of them still follow the patristic calendar. Under one name or another, they have a long history of failing to support those who follow the traditions of the fathers, of assailing them as schismatics, and of claiming that although ecumenism is wrong, it is not so wrong as to warrant separating from bishops who preach and foster it. A number of diatribes have been written by these people against the faithful who have broken communion with the ecumenist bishops. Perhaps the most widely circulated is an article written several years ago by Father Basil Grigorites entitled, quote, An Anti-Patristic, the Stance of the Zealot Old Calendars. This polemic sums up virtually all the arguments used against the Old Calendarist. Okay. Thus, to refute it entails a full justification of the position of the Orthodox and a confutation of its detractors. It is said in the Holy Scripture, rebuke a wise man, and he will love thee. Give instruction unto a wise man, and he will be yet wiser. Teach a just man, and he will increase in learning. It is the author's hope that the readers of this rejoinder, being wise, will understand the errors of Father Basil and of those of like mind, will sever communion with the ecumenist, and will adopt the stand of the Holy Fathers.
Yeah, it's interesting. The book I wrote, I started with the same exact quote.
Did you?
From the Bible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's definitely a heavy quote there.
Oh yeah, it's powerful.
And unfortunately, I brought this up recently. I think I feel it was almost like, the problem of our age. That's probably the chief problem of our age is people don't care about truth. And so even if you rebuke them, they don't care about truth. They don't even distinguish the difference between truth and lies in the world.
Right.
You know, there's a few people out here that don't even believe truth exists, let alone,
Oh yeah.
mm.
Hyperstition and all that.
Which if you're in a conversation with somebody like that, like, there's no intellectual honesty because they don't know what intellectual honesty is.
Well, I
I
hit them with the problem of mind. Right. So
Oh, what's that?
basically, if there's no truth, then where do your thoughts exist? Where do they come from? And what is a thinking person next to a non-thinking person?
I asked
Right.
Pete. I asked Pino this question one time. I said, is there any? Is there any? Does absolute truth exist? And he said, no, it does not. And then I was like, well, is that an absolute statement? You know what I'm saying? Because it's like a self-contradictory.
Right.
You know, that's pretty funny.
Yeah, similar stuff, right? With Plantinga and all that type of stuff. They could sort of argue them into a corner and say, if everything is just made up, right? So there's no truth, then where do new ideas come from? Right? Otherwise, how do you make something up, right? Based on what? Is it based on something that doesn't exist or something that does exist? Right. So yeah, so you just hit them with that.
I think what the main issue is, like, that I've found is, with certain people is that, you know even if they do accept the truth, if they'll know the truth, they don't care. Like, I've had that, like, discussion before,
Oh yeah.
which is a very strange one. What do you do with people that don't care?
Well, it's like it says, right? You gotta speak to people who actually care, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's another way to look at it, right? Don't speak to a fool because he'll get mad. Like I got two quotes actually. One says, you know, you know, speak only to somebody who's like understanding, and then it says, speak not to a fool because he'll despise your words in addition to not understanding what you say. He'll start hating you. So,
Right. I think, at least biblically, like, a lot of times the prophets would be telling God, God, I don't want to go and talk to these people. They don't care. And God's like, that's not really the point. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter if they don't care. It's you. Their the blood's on your hands if you don't go and tell them, because right? And it's
right.
like, now once you go and you tell them, and it's up to them to accept it or not. Really, that's kind of like I feel like that was the
Oh yeah.
whole purpose of, like, Ezekiel or something like that. He's like trying to convince, you know, these
Oh
people
yeah.
that are straying away from God, and well, I'm gonna get back to this text here. So it says, part one, the canonical considerations, the status of the uncondemned heretics. This is important. So it says, before examining any particular heresy, it will be useful to establish the church's teaching on heresy in general, especially since this forms the crux of Father Basil's argument. Are heretics before they are condemned by a council part of the church? And it isn't necessary, permissible, or forbidden to have communion with them? In addressing these questions, we turn to three sources of authority: the canons of the church, the writings of the Holy Fathers, and the church's actual practice and history. Here we shall examine two of the most relevant canons. The first and least Explicit is the 31st apostolic canon, which forbids the Christian from breaking away from his bishop, except when that bishop has offended against, quote, piety and justice. Since the ecumenist bishops since the ecumenist bishops have offended in many ways against piety and justice, even when these terms are defined in the narrowest sense possible, this canon, despite in general language, by itself justifies the Orthodox in severing communion with them. The second and more explicit canon is the 15th of the First and Second Council, which states, as for those persons who, on account of some heresy condemned by the holy councils or fathers, withdraw themselves from communion with their president, who preaches heresy publicly with a barred head in the church, such persons are not only not subject to any canonical penalty on account of their having walled themselves off from any and all communion with the one called a bishop before any conciliar or synodal verdict has been rendered, but on the contrary, they shall be deemed worthy to enjoy the honor which befits them among Orthodox Christians. For they have defied not bishops, but pseudo bishops and pseudo teachers, and they have not surrendered the unity of the church with any schism, but on the contrary have been sedulous to rescue the church from schisms and divisions. This ruling provides the primary canonical and distinct from patristic or historical basis for the position of the Old Calendar Church vis-a-vis the World Orthodoxy. Much of the polemic against the Orthodox Christians of the Old Calendar consists in denigrating, marginalizing, trivializing, or simply ignoring this canon, as we shall see from the following assertions from Father Basil. Okay. Assertion 1. Heretics who have been condemned by a council are outside the church, and no Orthodox Christian may have communion with them. Those who do so fall under the same structure as the heretics themselves. This initial and valid assertion is introduced by Father Basil, not to any positive purpose, but with a view to discredit those who break communion with the heretic who have not been synodally condemned. In fact, the passage he cites from the Fathers to support this valid assertion do not refer to, quote, condemned heretics, but to simply to heretics in general. The texts he quotes make no distinction between heretics who have been condemned by a council and those who have not, and not surprisingly, for there are no canons or patristic texts which state that one must remain in communion with heretics who have not yet been condemned by a council. The contrary rather is true. The scriptures and the Fathers state that a heretic, simply by reason of his heresy, is self-condemned. St. Paul, in his epistle to Titus, declares explicitly, quote, a man that is a heretic after the first and second admonition reject, knowing that he that is such is subverted and sinneth, being condemned of himself. Thus is amply expanded upon in the writings of such fathers as Saint Cyprian of Carthage, who in the 3rd century led out the Church's definitive teaching on the subject. He states that a heretic is, quote, of himself condemned and banished outside the fountains of paradise. Again, if everywhere heretics are called nothing other than adversaries and antichrist, if they are pronounced to be people to be avoided and to be perverted and condemned of their own selves, wherefore it is that they should not be thought worthy of being condemned by us, since it is evident from the apostolic testimony that they are of their own selves condemned. St. Cyprian does not allow for several faiths to coexist simultaneously within the church. The church is only one faith, nor does he allow heretics to be within the church. If one becomes a heretic, by definition, he is found outside the church. St. Firmilian of Caesarea confirms this doctrine, writing, quote, all the heretics, it is evident, were self-condemned and have declared against themselves an inevitable sentence before the day of judgment. End quote. St. Cyprian hammers this point over and over. heretics are outside the church by virtue of their heresy. Thus, the Apostle Paul explains, teaching and joining that a heretic must be avoided as condemned of himself, for that man will be guilty of his own ruin, who, not being cast out by the bishop by his own accord, deserting from the church, is by heretical presumption condemned of himself. There are many examples from church history and in the lives of the saints that illustrate that the church views heretics as being outside the church even before they are condemned by a council. Okay, so it says, okay, here we are. So, there are many examples from church history and the lives of the saints that illustrate that the church views heretics as being outside the church even before they are condemned by a council. In the disputation with Parias of Saint Maximus the Confessor, we read that the monothelite patriarch Parias recanted of his error, and thus he, quote, united himself to the Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, end quote. This took place on 645 before the local council of Carthage, held later in the same year, and Rome held in 649, and long before the Sixth Ecumenical Council of 681, all of which anathematized monothelitism. Again, St. Maximus declares concerning the monothelites, they have repeatedly excommunicated themselves from the church and are completely unstable in the faith. Additionally, they have been cut off and stripped of the priesthood by the local council held in Rome. What mysteries then can they perform, or what spirit descends on those who they ordain? Likewise, Saint Hopatius, abbot of a monastery. We talked about Saint Hopatius, I think, 2 episodes ago. I did basically a whole episode going into this, the life of Saint Hopatius. But anyways, he says, likewise, St. Hepatius, abbot of a monastery in Constantinople, said of the heretic Nestorius, quote, from the time that I learned that he said unrighteous things about the Lord, I have no longer been in communion with him. I do not commemorate his name, for he is not a bishop. This was pronounced before Nestorius had been condemned by the Third Ecumenical Council. And we know that to be true because we just read the life of St. Hepatius. Okay, so he goes on and he states, and again, many years before the Seventh Ecumenical Council, St. Stephen the New told the iconoclast bishop, uh, Theodosius, such are your decrees against the veneration of the holy icons, which were promulgated not by sons of the Catholic Church, but by godless adulterers. Certain is the prophet's saying, the rulers of the people were assembled together with the false shepherds and hirelings against Christ and his precious icon. In fact, the entire first session of the Seventh Ecumenical Council was devoted to how to receive the iconoclasts back into the church. The heretics were assumed to be already outside the church prior to the beginning of the council, as the petitions of the heretical bishops made clear. Theodore, Bishop of Myra, was then brought forward. He said, quote, and even I, a sinner and unworthy, have made deep inquiry and research, and having chosen the better part to do entreat of God and our holiness, that among the rest I also, though a sinner, may be united to the Catholic Church. Euthemius, Bishop of Sardis, said, quote, blessed be God who hath united him to the Catholic Church. And then John, legate of the See of Antioch, said, quote, and most holy Father, it is the question with many of us in what manner we ought to receive those who return from heresy. Wherefore we request this holy and sacred council to give order that the books of the Holy Fathers may be produced, that we may search and examine them, and so obtain perfect certainty as to the manner in which these persons also should be received in our minds, not made up on this matter. The council then read many testimonies of how heretics had been received in the past without discrimination between those who had been condemned by a council and those who had not. This shows quite clearly that the fathers of the council made no distinction between the two in this connection. In the course of this conversation, John, vicar of the See of Antioch, declared, quote, "Heresy separates every man from the church." The holy councils replied, quote, "That is very evident." This observation is still evident to the true Orthodox, but Father Basil and company seem to have forgotten it. At the end of the deliberation of the Holy Council said, quote, "Let the bishops now step forward and read their several recantations, as they now desire to enter the Catholic Church." Teresius replied, quote, "Let them read their recantations, now that these 2 points in question have been fully examined, namely the reception of those who come from the ranks of heresy to the Holy Catholic Church, and also those who have been ordained by heretics." The heretics read their recantations, and Tiresias said, quote, "As they have by their recantation made known their profession, let the reception take place at some future session, if there be no other cause of hindrance." Finally, the council, in its definitions of faith, officially declared the Orthodox position on heretics who have not yet been condemned by a council, stating, quote, "For they, the iconoclasts, have dared to slander the God befitting beauty of the sacred offerings, being called priests, while in reality they are not. Since the above proceedings of the Seventh Ecumenical Council also reflects wait, since the above proceedings of the Seventh Ecumenical Council reflect, at the highest level, the Church's understanding of the status of heretics uncondemned by a council, that understanding must be regarded as indisputable for the Orthodox to maintain, as does Father Basil, that such an uncondemned heretics remain members of the Church, completely contradicts the stance of the Seventh Council. So that's a really important topic. I think people like maybe don't consider when they jump into this, and I think it frightens the world Orthodox when we talk about it, because they're running from this topic, and that's why they're blocking us, because they really don't want to deal with the truth. The truth of the matter is, just as what was stated here, that since the above proceedings of the Seven Ecumenical Council reflect at the highest level the Church's understanding of the status of heretics uncondemned by council, that understanding must be regarded as indisputable for the Orthodox, as to maintain, as does Father Basil, as that such uncondemned heretics remain members of the Church, completely contradicts the stance of the Seventh Ecumenical Council. So we have to really think about that. So if this view, the Seventh Ecumenical Council states clearly that those who are uncondemned yet in heresy, that have found themselves teaching something, a doctrine that's heretical according to the Orthodox Church, even though this is prior to a council, they're separate from the Church. That's stated from the Seventh Ecumenical Council. The fact that these people are saying that can't happen is a telltale sign that they're not teaching orthodoxy. And in fact, they're going against orthodoxy by teaching otherwise. So when you hear Father Peter Harris or these other people kind of say that this is a heretic, but he hasn't been condemned yet at a council, so therefore we can stay in communion with him, that contradicts the Seventh Ecumenical Council. So, all right. So let's go to assertion 2. Okay. A direct refutation of this assertion. Assertion 2. An ecumenical council must condemn those who are preaching a heresy in order for the Orthodox to be justified in separating communion from the heretics. Okay, this is the statement. This is the assertion that they often make. So the reply: So it says, a direct refutation of this assertion on our part is unnecessary, as Father Basil abandons his own contention here when he later concedes that the condemnation of a local council suffices to justify a break with heretics. Then he goes further, admitting that in certain cases communion with heretics was actually severed before synodal condemnation of any sort, and that this is allowed by the 15th canon of the First and Second Council. Nevertheless, he qualifies these admissions by pretending that, quote, no sacred canon or holy fathers ever imposed the interruption of ecclesiastical communion with heretics on Orthodox followers prior to a synodal decision. To this contention we shall return shortly. From the above, it is clear that while he does not shrink from the labeling the Orthodox as schismatics because they have separated themselves from the ecumenist bishops before those bishops have been synodally condemned, Father Basil is quite confused as to what the real criteria are that would validate such a break. He allows it in the past that the Orthodox justly separated themselves from heretics in circumstances similar to those prevailing today, but he denies that the present day Orthodox may do so. Now, the 15th canon of the First and Second Council praises those who break communion with heretics. From that, it is evident that such people act rightly, not wrongly, and that it is a grievous sin to denounce them for following the explicit injunctions of the canons and holy fathers. Two of the church's primary modes of explication are encomium and vituperation. Vituperation. The church praises those who lead her children towards God. She reviles those who turn her children away from God. Her approval of those who wall themselves off from heretical bishops is powerful testimony to the fact that the stand of the old calendarists encouraged by holy tradition. It is evident from even the most cursory reading of the canons that the Orthodox are permitted to separate from a bishop who preaches heresy. From this, it follows that whenever bishops openly profess heresy, the Orthodox are automatically justified from breaking communion with them. And here we arrive at the central point. The position of the Orthodox Church is in actuality much stronger. It is not only praiseworthy, but absolutely obligatory to separate from heretical bishops. Hold on. I'm having trouble reading for some reason. A careful reading shows that this is precisely what the canon demands, for it labels hierarchs who promulgate heresy as, quote, pseudo-bishops and pseudo-teachers. Such language can only mean that these bishops have, quote, divided the church. That is, they have fallen away from the church. For this reason, they are no longer bishops at all, but, quote, pseudo-bishops, bishops in name only. To put more simply, if they were true bishops, true and orthodox bishops, then they would not be false bishops. The fact that the canon resorts to such strong language mandates the Orthodox to separate from the heretical, quote, bishops in order to belong to the church. One must be under bishops who therefore are part of the church. It is spiritually disastrous to remain in communion with a bishop who does not rightly divide the word of truth. The bishop teaches and leads the people to Christ, but if he teaches falsely, he leads the people away from Christ. He is the icon of Christ, and it is as an Orthodox bishop that he teaches in the stead of Christ. To advocate remaining in communion with a heretical bishop simply because he has not been condemned by a council is to subvert or even render null the entire meaning of the hierarchy in the church. The virtue or faith of the laity does not correct the bishop's lack of Orthodox faith. Rather, the bishop's mission pollutes the laity. In practice, we see this taking place in ecumenist churches, where the laity have been drenched in ecumenist propaganda for so long that majority of them does not even have an inkling of what is the true Orthodox teaching of what constitutes the church. But even where the process is not so naked and advanced, the very fact that the laity accepts these pseudo bishops necessarily means that they tactfully accept and acquiesce to the misbelief of their bishops. It is this context that St. Cyprian of Carthage writes, quote, "We find that in such wickedness not only the leaders and originators, but also the partakers are destined to punishment, unless they have separated themselves from the communion of the wicked, as the Lord by Moses commands and says, Separate yourselves from the tents of the most hardened men, and touch nothing of theirs, lest ye be consumed in their sins." Numbers XVI and 26. And what the Lord has threatened by Moses, he fulfills, that whosoever had not separated himself from Korah and Dathan and Abram immediately suffered punishment for his impious communion, by which example it is shown and proved that all will be liable to guilt as well as its punishment, who with irreligious boldness mingle themselves with schismatics in opposition to prelates and priests. All are absolutely joined with the leaders in punishment, who have been contaminated by their crime. Beyond this, let us consider a few of the countless perplexities that arise. It is if it is permissible but not obligatory to break communion with heretical bishops side by side, yet out of communion with each other. Two groups will exist, one headed by Orthodox bishops, the other by heretics. Which of these is their church? Or, if both together constitute the church, ought they not be in communion? But then it would be praiseworthy for the Orthodox to be in communion with heretics, whereas we have already seen that the canons praise the Orthodox for breaking communion with heretics. Again, if heretical bishops are really still Orthodox because they have not been synodally condemned, then how can one dare to break communion with them as did the saints? How can a faction headed by openly heretical bishops be the church, which, as the apostle teaches, is the pillar and foundation of the truth? It's interesting and important these perplexities may be, nevertheless, they are rendered largely irrelevant with respect to the current situation, since the heresies in question here have in fact already been synodally condemned. The Gregorian calendar was anathematized synodally in 1583, multiple times thereafter, while ecumenism was condemned by the Russian Church abroad in 1983. Now, some would imagine that anathema laid down in the past have to be, quote, reimposed by a modern council in order to be valid. If this were the case, we would have to affirm that were somewhere to become a that were someone to become a monophysite or a Roman Catholic today, he would remain part of the church until a contemporary synod of bishops reimposed the ancient anathemas on him, which is ridiculous. This would mean that that truth has an expiration date, and that the church, in order to ensure that no heretic remain inside her, would have to hold an ecumenical council every year, even more frequently, perhaps. But the truth of the matter is that an anathema, once pronounced, is forever valid against all who fall under it. Its efficaciousness does not depend upon it being reactivated by a new council every time an individual or group espouses the heresy in question. This is supported by the Acts of the Seventh Ecumenical Council, which declared, quote, to those who have taught, do teach, or will teach that there is one will and one energy in the incarnate dispensation of Jesus Christ, anathema. In other words, not just the living heretics, but all those who at any time in the future adopt the heresy are under the anathema. This explains why the church holds the anathemas pronounced at the 16th century against those who accept the new calendar to be just as valid and binding today as when they were issued. This is why contemporary new calendars must be regarded as falling under the already existing anathemas, declaring whoever accepts the new calendar to be outside the church. Okay, so it's a LARPodox. Yeah, you think so, man? Well, you're a deleted comment. How about that? That got deleted, boy. Okay, so I'm going to stop here on that. So, what's up, man?
Yeah, nothing much, dude. It's interesting.
Yeah, I think so. Because, I mean, especially when we get to like the nitty gritty about the details of this stuff. Because just that one, I'll return another day with the rest of that. But just that one segment, the fact that they say something can't happen and then the Seventh Ecumenical Council says this happened, and this is how it happens, and this is how the church views this. And I mean, it just shows they're in complete disagreement.
Yeah, it's weird that they have to call a whole council to condemn one person for not being a Christian if they're Catholic or monophysite or whatever. Is this what I said?
What was being stated is that the church doesn't need to do that, right? So it's like,
Right, right.
it's kind of moronic, like what they're saying. It's like, well, you know, well, the new calendar was condemned in the 16th century. They were like, well, that doesn't count. You need new anathemas or something, right? Those ones don't count.
Oh,
Do you understand what I'm saying? And it's
yeah,
like,
yeah,
well,
yeah.
you don't have to do that because nobody else has ever done that when it comes to other things that have been anathematized. So why would that only apply to this? You understand what I'm saying? That's really the
Yeah. Yeah, it's also interesting how he separated the two, the new calendar from ecumenism, and said they're two separate condemned heresies. So it's a pan heretical framework that they're working within. It's not just
well. First and
that they
foremost,
follow one heresy because they follow a different sect, right?
so with the new calendar, it's anathematized, right? So that doesn't necessarily mean it's heretical. Rather, it's an act of apostasy. But even putting it in place is an anathematized act, right? Because the way we look at this, it's like the Pope had demanded the Orthodox in like 1583 accept the new calendar or the Gregorian calendar, right? And the Orthodox of that period said, no, we're not going to do it, and we're going to anathematize this calendar, right? So by accepting it, you're falling under that anathema. That's what they're saying, right? It's not necessarily that the calendar itself is a heresy or something. That's what they try to like. They try to distort it and say things like that. But the way we look at it is like this is an act of apostasy that has been anathematized first and foremost, and that also was the precursor to ecumenism, because first and foremost the reason it was implemented was for closer relations with the Roman Catholics and the Protestants of the West. Ecumenism is the Orthodox coming together with the Catholics and Protestants of the West. You see what I'm saying? So by instituting a calendar that we share with them, that's stating that you're aligning with them. So it's kind of an ecumenical act or a schismatic act. And what's kind of like a misnomer is the new calendars will say, well, you broke communion over the calendar. And it's like, no, the calendar was one aspect of the reforms. There was many reforms at that time They were trying to shorten the services. They were trying to all, do all this kind of wild stuff. And it's like, it's not only the reforms, it's who was reforming it, right? It's like a group of Freemasons comes in, a gang of Freemasons, Molotius Miltekis, he takes over. And they start making changes to how the Orthodox practice. Like, okay, so a Freemason can just come in dressed as a bishop now, make changes, and we're supposed to follow those changes. You see what I'm saying? It's kind of absurd. So what we're saying is like, and by the way, the old calendars waited 11 years before they broke communion fully. Like a full break didn't come for 11 years. It wasn't like it happened overnight. Like they were struggling, and eventually they were saying, okay, so these people are just not changing their ways, and and even then with Saint Chrysostomos of Florina, who was the early bishop that was leaving the ecumenical patriarch and establishing the true Orthodox, he was talking to the New Calendars bishops, and they were lying to him. They were telling him like, we're going to return to the old calendar. So he wasn't keen on calling them schismatics very early on. He said they were potentially schismatic. Well, eventually he changed his mind on that. And now some people say, well, he was forced to change it. I don't believe that. I feel like he actually felt like they had reached a point where they had turned their back on truth, and that prior to this, he had assumed that they sincerely were going to turn back to the old calendar, and they never were, and they're only going to go further into this new calendar, new age, ecumenistic type stuff.
Now the old calendar is a solar calendar too, or it's a different setup?
Yeah, it's a solar calendar. Yeah.
Oh, it's interesting.
I believe so, right? Like, I don't know. It's the Julian calendar, but it was instituted at the First Ecumenical Council. I know that. So it's the Julian calendar. It was instituted at the First Ecumenical. That's an important topic that they don't like talking about. Actually, is the fact that like an entire ecumenical council puts the the Julian calendar in place, or the old calendar in place, as it's called. It's like only a council of equal level could have made a decision to override that. It had been in there. It's there for 2,000 years, and then you get to like the 1920s, and a group of Masons can just like change that, But something that the paper kind of distinguished too, that there's certain people that haven't gone along with the change, but are still considered World Orthodox, and those are people that sort of like are in the old calendars churches, but they don't mind being in communion with the new calendarists, and they've sort of submitted themselves to the Moscow Patriarchate,
Yeah, and it has weird implications. I mean, most of the viewers may not, realize, but it kind of like changes things. Like it changes the day of Christmas, for example. So I'd say that's pretty weird. All right. So when I found that out, I think that's pretty significant. All right.
Right. Well, and there's also like an apostles fast that it completely usually gets rid of. Like, so there's no apostles fast, and that's important. Like you get, but this is something they don't think of. It's like, okay, if for 2,000 years we have set up this calendar, we built our life on this, our spiritual life on this calendar. We venerate the saints on these specific days. You know what I mean? Do they think like the saints in heaven are worshiping on those new calendar days? Like, I don't understand like the kind of mentality. Like, I feel like there's a connection between the church triumphant and the church militant, and they, have abided by these dates, and it's kind of shown in like, we have like these kind of patristic stories of like Saint Spiridon showing up on Saint Spiridon's day. at a New Calendarists church, kind of warning them, and they were celebrating Christmas rather than Saint Spiridon's, and he's like telling them like you should be celebrating Saint Spiridon's, so.
Yeah, I see like a lot of like, magic is like time related, right?
Jerry Lena, that's kind of like his point too. I don't know if you're trying to if you're saying this, but he talks about how like the communists did things on specific dates. You know what I mean? So there's inversions of it as well.
Right, like numbers and time and symbols, like dealing with perception and like it's kind of like look over here, while I do this thing and then plan something exactly so this symbol shows up and then it causes something something to happen in the mind of the person to where they put the event with the with the symbol, they get psyoped.
Actually, like that's something I've noticed in polemics, like that's often used, especially I'm kind of just like equating this to like some polemics I've seen used. So, for instance, like the atheist will compare something that's um, doesn't apply. For instance, they'll say for God, they'll say, okay, so it's like it's like worshiping a flying spaghetti monster, or an invisible dragon or something like that. They'll like compare God to like something like a flying spaghetti monster. And the reason they want to do that is they want to conflate something that doesn't exist, that we know that doesn't exist, with God, right? It's like some imaginary thing, Santa Claus or something, right? But it's like when you think about that in reality, it's like, well, Santa Claus doesn't have, relics and, a religion, or, you know what I mean? Like there's tangible things that they don't acknowledge. But that's a part of psyoping in general, or like kind of manipulating and passing off a lie, I guess. Like that's how the atheist passes off the lie, I would say. Kind of went on a long tangent.
No, absolutely. It's like if you could get tricked that like something can come from nothing, then you could basically be told like a bunch of other shit that doesn't make sense. Because it's like, why not just have like, oh well, there's no mind, like it's just atoms smashing, and why are they smashing? It's like, I don't know. It's the laws of nature. Why are the laws of nature there? Just that's how they felt like doing things today, right? So
I think
it
that
just kind of gets into weird territory.
I think the scientific minded or the materially minded person, they see themselves as extremely intelligent. That's the problem, and it's like that becomes the blocker. That becomes the cognitive, blinder that's there, because you're convincing yourself something doesn't exist based on a presumption, right? Like, and you're going, and it's like that's kind of like everything to do with the ideologies that developed out of the Renaissance. It's like people just assume these things to be true because they've been taught them since they were in like grade school or something like that, not realizing that a lot of these things are like polemics and like, things
Right.
that are philosophy that are being passed off as fact.
Right.
And
Right.
that's
That's what tripped me out.
right.
That's what tripped me out the most when I found out like a lot of the stuff that the scientists supposedly came up with, the philosophers were talking about it for hundreds of years.
Right.
So they didn't just land on this problem that they magically solved later. Right? It was natural philosophy, and then it became science magically. They proved their own findings. They proved the conclusion they already assumed. In other
What they're
words,
looking for, the
right?
thing, like with Darwin, like when I went
Right.
Darwin, I see a guy who's looking for the things that he expects to be there, and he finds them. And like, it's a situation where if you actually examine the situation and you question these things, they're supposedly unquestionable, that can't be questioned. When they do come under scrutiny, you find that it's not always aligning with this, infallible fact in some way. Like,
Right.
I think that's what you'll find in a number of issues. But the scientific minded or the materialistic minded, not saying that science doesn't have its place or materialism doesn't have its place, because there's certain ideas that are truthful to a certain extent. There, but I think the reality of it is like people don't realize, like, this is paganism kind of getting its revenge on Christianity. It's the Talmudic Jew getting his revenge on Christianity in a lot of ways, like just ideology wise. You know what I'm saying? Like, seriously, like, what else could you call it? Like, when you have liberalism and all these ideologies and communism pop up, these are ideologies and complete competing with Christianity, and that's what Darwin was. It was a reply,
Yeah, it's this idea of collective salvation, right? Where you have the Messiah be replaced with the entire, Jewish nation.
Yeah.
So that's the same thing that Blavatsky says. She says there's no Messiah. It's just the awakening of Christ consciousness.
Yeah.
So what was just an individual thing becomes something that's linked to an eschatological scheme and then collectivized.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and therefore replaced. All right, but yeah.
Well, that's why, like, it, what's such a trip about Blavatsky is, she seems to be rejecting the Jew, right, and the Talmud and all these things, but still applying it. But she wants to apply it to her own, her own trip. And that's always seems like the same thing with all these people, is like they're just taking these other ideas that come from the Talmud and reworking them and reshaping them for their own
Yeah.
ideologies.
Yeah,
And
she's mapping on the the Kabbalistic tree of life to the tarot system and also the chakra system.
right,
Right. So she's basically just saying that these are all different parts of awakening of the self, so on and so forth. Right. So basically she called this the Oriental Kabbalah, and she mixed the Kabbalistic practices of the Kabbalistic tree of life with the tantric spirituality. That was a late stage development
right,
of Hinduism and Buddhism.
right.
Right.
Like choosing some bed or something, like,
Yeah, they came up with it later. Right. Like the OG Buddha and the OG teachers of like the Vedanta and stuff, they never taught this stuff. They actually considered it basically Satanism. Right. So like,
because it is really, and she admits it in her book, The Secret Doctrine, that that Satan is the true God. She says that in the book. And I just think it's interesting that you have somebody like Hitler that's obsessed with this book, The Secret Doctrine. He's got pages outlined in his own handwriting. And then I look at the communists, and they're it comes to find out they're obsessed with the same book, The Secret Doctrine.
yeah,
But
well, both Steiner and Blavatsky, they pull this move where they say, I think they say Satan and Lucifer are two different people. And then they say basically Satan is the bad guy, but Lucifer is Jesus to them. Right. So they just
right,
basically flip everything.
right, he's the savior in some way or whatever.
Right.
Well,
It's like enlightenment will come to everybody. So
right.
like it's basically Lucifer.
Well, I studied something recently. It was like, those like old band videos. Remember when so there was a time for the younger people that might see this. So there was a time period where YouTube had a influx of conspiracy videos. So there was conspiracy videos, and there was all kinds of things that you can find on like the Illuminati and Ted Guntherson and William Cooper and those type of people. Well, anyways, around that time period, I could recall seeing something where it was explaining, what the belief system of Freemasonry, and how, Hiram Abiff is looked at as this enlightened one, right? And that each Mason's job is to reach this level of the master builder or the enlightened one, with the secret, to Masonry, which is, whatever that is, which is basically, this Christ consciousness thing, that everybody is Christ in some way. Hiram Abiff was a Christ and prior to Christ, and then, the whole goal is to build Solomon's temple. But that's what the Talmudic Jews want. So why it's strange that Freemasonry and the Talmudic Jews have the same plans, and that's like why I think Herzl is important too, because he says the goal of the Gentile Masons don't even know what they're in it for. They don't realize that all of Masonry is directed towards the goals of the Jew, and I believe that's true behind the scenes. Although, like, that's where it is kind of strange, though, because you have things like the Tully Society where it's like, they're saying the Kabbalah came from the Egyptians. And you got like these offshoots of Freemasonry, and there's warring groups among Masons, which I didn't know about until recently. So I started talking to these people, and there's warring groups among them, man.
Oh yeah, and what's interesting is that there's a fascinating genealogy, right, within Europe between the Rosicrucians, right, that are partially sort of linked to the Fourth Crusade, right, and how there's roots in Bohemia, right, with Vlad Dracul, and that this is actually where Martin Luther traveled when he was trying to be like escape persecution from the church, right? He traveled to Bohemia, right, and the whole Lutheran Reformation, right, how that sort of links up with the writings of Giuseppe Mazzini, right, who took a sort of peculiar interest in the developments of the Protestant Reformation, right, and of course there's an interesting link between the teachings of Helena Blavatsky and the teachings of Giuseppe Mazzini.
Definitely.
Right. So, and also you have interesting ideas going on in Europe, because you have a European Enlightenment, but then a little while later you have the Jayish Haskalah, right? And you have a bunch of different people like Moses Mendelssohn who are actually collaborating with people like Immanuel Kant, right?
No.
And Kant is already studying Swedenborg and different ideas from people like Swedenborg, who also wrote about the Oriental Kabbalah. Right. So he was also a perennial thinker, just like Blavatsky. Right.
Yeah.
So you have some of the roots of modern Western philosophy tied to the occult as well. Right. And of course, by the time you get to Marx, he's intricately tied to the occult.
Definitely. I have a video. I think it's by Christopher Story. I think that's who speaking in a video. I'm not sure. I think the video is called Lenin's World Revolutionary Movement, and I think he said that Marx had a satanic altar in his house. I thought that was a trip. You ever heard that?
It makes a lot of sense if you look at his early poetry. Right. Yeah, he wrote like sort of Gnostic poetry, right? And then his dad, he was definitely a crypto. Seems like it, right? The reason being, was that we mentioned last show that basically, Jays were not allowed to earn a living. Right. Basically working for the government, which was basically his position. Right.
So his father posed as a Protestant.
Yeah, as a Protestant. Yeah. Right. So it's interesting. And then his father was a supporter of the Enlightenment, and Marx was a follower of Hegel, who supported the French Revolution, and who was also basically heavily interested in Hermeticism and the Kabbalah. You know, it seemed
So,
like, yeah.
so since we're going to all that, right? I figured that I would bring up the survival course on the French Revolution.
Oh, yeah.
So I thought
Yeah, it's
that
interesting.
go there.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear it.
Yeah, yeah, it's awesome, man. I love this section of this. He gets into the Illuminati and stuff too later on into the course, and that's a really great piece. Hopefully, we can get to that. So let me see if I can find it. Okay.
I don't know if you took a look at that link I sent you earlier. It's interesting. It's like a tree that shows how the Rothschilds were related to Marx. So maybe we could pull that up after this video.
Yeah, I definitely will. Definitely do that.
Because it's interesting, right? Because it's like, you know, there's a direct like thing tying him to Nathaniel Mayer Rothschild. It's crazy.
Okay, yeah. So we're gonna go to the French Revolution, the Illuminati, and mass bloodshed. So let's go there. All right. Present this on stage real quick. All right, here we go.
Orthodox Survival Course by Father Seraphim Rose and Father Podmashinsky. Lecture 7, The French Revolution, Part 2. Secret Societies. But to these two philosophical elements there is added now a third thing, which is the secret societies. Of course, the secret societies have an underground existence throughout the period before the Enlightenment, but it is especially in the 18th century that there is born a new sect, or at least a reorganized one, and that is Freemasonry, which was born in England in 1717 and very quickly spread to France.
Okay, so I got that what you sent me. I'm going to pull this up real quick, just real quick. So take a look at this. Hold on. There we go. So here we are. So it says the family
And I
tree.
believe also this cat Zenella Bogan, Martin Buber is actually related to this guy too. So yeah, so it's interesting. So Marx is actually his distant cousin is actually Martin Buber, who was a Jewish guy who basically supported communism. Right. So it's very significant because if you look at Buber's works, right, like I and Thou and all this stuff, there's a lot of implications for spiritualism in his philosophy, right? He's basically like a Jewish spiritualist communist, right? But yeah.
Wow. Yeah, like it's very strange how this is a connection here with this. Nathaniel Meyer, the first Rothschild with Marx. That's
Right.
Henry Kine. This is wild.
And I think the Lionel Nathan de Rothschild, I believe he was MP in in England when Marx moved to England, because he moved to England to write Das Kapital, I believe. Right? So yeah, it's interesting.
It says the family tree of Karl Marx is presented in my book, The Jewish Journey: A Passage through European History. He's also known as Moses Mendelssohn, and others in a chart on my webpage. The line is descent from Sal Wall.
Yeah, Moses Mendelssohn was a guy who wrote letters to Immanuel Kant, right? And he's actually a prominent figure in the Jewish Haskalah, right? The Jewish Enlightenment, as it's called, right?
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Honestly, that's fascinating stuff, man. Okay, so we're gonna get back to the other thing. Right? I thought I would just bring that up real quick. Stop this. Present the. There we go.
and America and the rest of Europe. Later on, we shall see that Freemasonry in England and in America become something rather different from Freemasonry on the continent, especially in the Catholic countries. And the reason for this is not so difficult to understand. The English mentality, which gave the world already the philosophy of deism, is a so-called, quote, conservative mentality. That is, it's capable of believing just about anything and being quite content, and not pushing its beliefs to any logical conclusions. Just as later on we'll see David Hume destroy the whole of the world and then sits back and enjoys himself, and drinks his coffee and smokes his pipe, not seeing that he's given ideas which will drive people to despair. In the same way, English Masonry was born out of the spirit of tolerance and seeking to find some kind of a religious belief which is neither Catholic nor Protestant, but which will bind together all men of goodwill. And they were satisfied with that. They had a deistic religion, the Grand Architect. There were no religious differences discussed in the lodge. You have to put religion behind. And for the Englishmen and later for the Americans, this was considered to be sufficient. If you believe in God, you can go to your Protestant church or your Anglican church and be happy. Section B, Illuminati. Adam, Weishaupt, born 1748, Jesuit training, but hated them, turned to French philosophers, Manichaeans, and occult doctrines. Quotes Webster 8 through 10. Very similar philosophy to Rousseau, but added secret revolutionary society. May 1st, 17.
By the way,
A combination of Freemasonry
yeah, I
and
want to point this out real quick.
Masonry. The very idea
That, like, obviously the philosophy of Voltaire and Diderot,
Yeah.
right, were like hugely significant for the French Revolution, right? Some of it was like Rousseau and stuff, although Rousseau was kind of like against Voltaire and Diderot's views, largely, right? And he was critiqued for it. But another interesting idea is the fact that Hume may have like went to France to spy for the British government.
Wow.
So there's some weird stuff for that. So he may have been like spying for the British government because to what extent the British government helped create the French Revolution, because they were always against France.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Right. So there's an interesting link between British intelligence and the French Revolution. Right? On a side note, right?
Definitely. And you know what? That makes a lot of sense considering because okay, for one, of course the British would want to get their system involved. You know what I mean? Like their people in there. I feel like that's what they constantly do is kind of send agents in or something, right?
Right. Like also in the Civil War.
Right.
They sent their agents in here. So it's interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And they're definitely aligned. The British have always been largely aligned with the Rothschild banking. So that's probably what was going on in some way then too. I know the Grand Orient of France, that whole thing, like they, it directly they claim to have been behind the French Revolution. They say that, in their periodicals or whatever.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So and as far as I know, Freemasonry, the head of Freemasonry is England, the Lodge of England, the Grand Lodge of England. But they don't recognize the Grand Orient of France, and it's because of this rule about atheism. You know, because the Grand Orient accepts atheists, but the the Grand Lodge of England doesn't. They say that to be a Mason you have to believe in some God, and they fight over that. But I mean, I don't know. I still think there's some connection.
Of Masonry, the ideas of a brotherhood of men, which is something above Catholicism or Protestantism. When they went to the continent, they inflamed men's minds and made them quite radical. There is in particular one kind of Freemasonry, which apparently was evolved separately, and this is what is called Illuminism. This was the creature of one man, whose name is Adam Weishaupt. He was born in 1748, went through a Jesuit education, and later on came to hate the Jesuits, turned to the French philosophers, to Manichaean philosophy, and apparently had some kind of occult initiation in one of the many occult sects. Let us examine here a few of his views. He says, in agreement with Rousseau, that civilization is a great mistake, and to this all the inequalities of human life were due. He says, man is fallen from the condition of liberty and equality, the state of pure nature. He is under subordination and evil bondage arising from the vices of man. This is the fall and original sin. Notice he uses the Christian term here, original sin. Later on, we'll see how this all is an imitation of Christianity. According to him, all the arts and sciences must be abolished. He says, do the common sciences afford real enlightenment, real human happiness, or are they rather children of necessity, the complicated needs of a state contrary to nature, the inventions of vain and empty brains? Why, he asks, should it be impossible to the human race to attain its highest perfection, the capacity for governing itself? For this reason, he taught that not only should kings and nobles be abolished, but even a republic should not be tolerated, and the people should be taught to do without controlling authority, any law, or any civil code. In order to make this system a success, it would be necessary only to inculcate in man a just and steady morality. And since Weishaupt professed to share Rousseau's belief in the inherent goodness of human nature, this would not be difficult, and society might then go on peaceably in a state of perfect liberty and equality. For since the only real obstacle to human perfection lay in the restraints imposed on man by artificial conditions of life, the removal of these must inevitably restore him to his primitive virtue. Man is not bad except as he is made so by arbitrary morality. He is bad because religion, the state, and bad examples pervert him. It was necessary, therefore, to root out from his mind all ideas of a hereafter, all fear of retribution for evil deeds, and to substitute for these superstitions the religion of reason.
Why?
When at last reason becomes the religion of men, then will the problem be solved.
Hmm.
After deliverance from the bondage of religion, the loosening of all social ties must follow. both family and national life must cease to exist as to make of the human race one good and happy family. The origins of patriotism and the love of kindred are thus described.
Why this is important too, because I want to go back to Duncan's revolutions at a certain point. I don't know if I'll do it today, but what I think you're going to find is that the comparison between Weishaupt and Trotsky is important. The how much Trotsky really pulled from somebody like Weishaupt is really surprising. Like he looked to the Illuminists, he looked to this mindset that you were going to create the communist one world utopia at the end.
Right.
It's like endless revolutionary movement that would lead up to it. You know what I mean? Like this was his plan, and it's clearly coming right out of like this same revolutionary mindset that we see that that influenced Weishaupt, I'd say. Right.
Yeah, they both, you know, contradicted themselves when they dealt with nationalism and internationalism. They sort of played both sides,
Yeah.
right? They were dealing with a national movement on the face of it, but on the other side of it, they're dealing with the international movement behind it. So they're trying to, sort of play both sides there. And you see that with Trotsky and his sort of flip flopping on Zionism,
Right.
right? Where, and towards the end, he supported it, right?
Absolutely.
Whereas, before that, he was a through and through about the international movement of communism, right?
Yeah. Well, that's kind of, it's kind of similar with Hitler as well, because like at the end of his life, there wasn't this like, big like rally, like continue the Nazi movement while I'm gone or something, rather he's handing off the torch to Stalin, or you know what I mean? Like he's handing off the torch to the Soviets and saying like, you'll be the ones to conquer the world. And I think that just like goes to show like, these guys don't have a firm grounding. Like they're I feel like, you know especially with these types, Trotsky, especially him, it feels like his entire life he's only using, it was something really interesting. It was like Trotsky would, save the world or save Russia as long as someone seen him do it. He would do this good action as long as somebody else seen him do it. Like that's the only time he would do something good, because he was only worried about himself. And I think that was the big problem with is any communist out there that thinks that Lenin or Trotsky was great. These guys were egomaniacs, man. They didn't care about anybody. And those people will act like, oh yeah, they were all about the workers' parties. Like if you listen to that Duncan's, Mike Duncan's, breakdown of Marx and his history in that first international, and then you compare and contrast it with, Weishaupt and then Trotsky and Lenin, you see that this is a scheme, man.
Described by Weishaupt in the directions given to his hierophants for the instruction of initiates. At the moment when men united themselves into nations, they ceased to recognize themselves under a common name. Nationalism or national love took the place of universal love. With the division of the globe and its countries' benevolence restricted itself behind boundaries that it was never again to transgress. Then it became a virtue to spread out at the expanse of those who did not happen to be under our dominion. Then, in order to attain this goal, it became permissible to despise foreigners, and to deceive and to offend them. This virtue was called patriotism. That man was called a patriot who, whilst just towards his own people, was unjust to others, who blinded himself to the merits of foreigners and took for perfections the vices of his own country. So one sees that patriotism gave birth to localism, to the family spirit, and finally to egoism. Thus, the origin of states or governments of civil society was the seed of discord, and patriotism found its punishment in itself. Diminish, do away with this love of country, and men will once more learn to know and love each other as men. There will be no more partiality. The ties between hearts will unroll and extend. In these words, the purest expression of internationalism as it is expounded today, Weishaupt displayed an ignorance of primeval conditions of life as profound as that of Rousseau. The idea of the Paleolithic man, whose skeleton is usually exhumed with a flint instrument or other weapon of warfare grasped in his hand, passing his existence in a state of universal love, is simply ludicrous. It was not, however, in his diatribes against civilization that Weishaupt surpassed Rousseau, but in the plan he devised for overthrowing it. Rousseau had merely paved the way for revolution. Weishaupt constructed the actual machinery of revolution itself. It was on the 1st of May 1776 that Weishaupt's 5 years of meditation resulted in his founding the secret society that he named, after bygone philosophical systems, the Illuminati. Web 11 through 12 and 13. Abolition of religion, absolute obedience. The grades of the order were a combination of the grades of Freemasonry and the degrees belonging to the Jesuits. Weishaupt, as has already been said, detested the Jesuits, but recognizing the efficiency of their methods in acquiring influence over the minds of their disciples, he conceived the idea of adopting their system to his own purpose. He admired, says the Abbe Beruel, the institutions of the founders of this order. He admired above all those laws that regime of the Jesuits, which under one head made so many men dispersed all over the universe tend towards the same object. He felt that one might imitate their methods whilst proposing to himself views diametrically opposed. He said to himself, "What all these men have done for altars and empires, why should I not do against altars and empires? By the attraction of mysteries, of legends, of adepts, why should I not destroy in the dark what they erect in the light of day?" It was in the training of adepts that Weishaupt showed his profound subtlety. Proselytes were not to be admitted at once to the secret aims of Illuminism, but initiated steps.
So, what he's about to get into, which I found fascinating, is like he talks about how like the Illuminists would recruit women, right? And that's something also mentioned in the protocols, I believe, right? It's like we're going to recruit these women to be spies for us and do our bidding. But if you look at the Epstein stuff going on, isn't that exactly what he was doing? You know, isn't that a little weird?
Yeah, man. I feel like I went to a grocery store. I saw the same chick like 3 times. Like, I need to get the fuck out of here.
Be careful, bro. They're sending them.
step by step into the higher mysteries. And the greatest caution was to be exercised, not to reveal to the novice doctrines that might likely to revolt him. For this purpose, the initiators must acquire the habit of talking backwards and forwards so as not to commit themselves. One must speak, Weishaupt explained to the superiors of the order, sometimes in one way, sometimes in another, so that our real purpose should remain impenetrable to our inferiors. Thus, to certain novices, the novices ecosis, the Illuminati must profess to disapprove of revolutions and demonstrate the advantages of proceeding by peaceful methods towards the attainment of world domination. The passage then goes on to say vaguely that this is not the case and that the order only demands of the initiate the fulfillment of his obligations. Nor must antagonism to religion be admitted. On the contrary, Christ was to be represented as the first author of Illuminism, whose secret mission was to restore all men the original liberty and equality that they had lost in the fall. No one, the novice should be told, paved so sure a way for liberty as our grand master Jesus of Nazareth. And if Jesus exhorted his disciples to despise riches, it was in order to prepare the world for that community of goods that should do away with property. Web 13 through 14. Novices initiated step by step into the higher mysteries.
So
It was not then until his admission
he had a vision clearly of a utopia, right? And it's like why it's like that same vision would go on to influence the communists and the the Nazis and the current globalists that we see today. It's like this is the
Right.
globalist mission.
Right.
Now.
It's both the the American Revolution and the French Revolution. So the two people that are really significant is Locke and Marx. Not Locke and Marx, but Locke and Rousseau.
Right.
Right, because Locke and Rousseau basically changed the whole idea. Like one of the things they're talking about how all men are born free and equal. Right, that's exactly what Locke writes in his philosophy.
Yeah.
Right, and then Rousseau sort of builds on this to add this notion that civilization is what corrupted our tastes. Right, that we were sort of noble savages. Right, so there's the idea of both sort of capitalism and the origins of socialism. Both of them come from the same understanding of this idea of natural rights and how the goal of civilization is to restore our natural freedom, and so on and so forth. And so you could look at how in Locke, civilization is the answer, whereas in Rousseau, nature is the answer. And there you have the Enlightenment and also Romanticism as a response.
Mm-hmm.
Right, where you have like capitalism and socialism. So it's just two heads of the same snake.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's something I was just thinking about too, is this idea that in the case of like communism, that a lot of people think it's diametrically opposed to America or capitalism. It's not. It's the perfect system as far as the bankers are concerned. And the communists clearly see the funding of America, and then they stole ideas, and now they're assimilating their communist regime to be more, presentable for the Western eye. That's where their whole fakery is involved, I guess.
to the higher grades that the adept was initiated into the real intentions of Illuminism with regard to religion. When he reached the grade of illuminated major or minor, of Scotch knight, epopte, or priest, he was told the whole secret of the order in a discourse by the initiator. Remember that from the first invitations which we have given you in order to attract you to us, we commenced by telling you that in the projects of our order there did not enter any designs against religion. You remember that such an assurance was given you when you were admitted into the ranks of our novices, and that it was repeated when you entered into our Minerval Academy. You remember with what art, with what simulated respect we have spoken to you of Christ and of his gospel. But in the grades of greater Illuminism, of Scotch Knight and the Epopte or priest, how we have to know to form from Christ's gospel that of our reason, and from its religion that of nature, and from religion, reason, morality, and nature, to make the religion and morality of the rights of man, of equality, and of liberty. We have had many prejudices to overcome in you before being able to persuade you that the pretended religion of Christ was nothing else than the work of priests, of imposture, and of tyranny. If it be so with that religion so much proclaimed and admired, what are we to think of other religions? Understand then that they have all the same fictions for their origin, that they are equally founded on lying, error, chimera, and imposture. Behold our secret. If in order to destroy all Christianity, all religion, we have pretended to have the sole true religion, remember that the end justifies the means, and that the wise ought to take all the means to do good, which the wicked take to do evil. Those which we have taken to deliver you, those which we have taken to deliver one day the human race from all religion, are nothing else than a pious fraud, which we reserve to unveil one day in the grade of magus or philosopher illuminated. But all this was unknown to the novice, whose confidence being won by the simulation of religion, was enjoined to strict obedience. Among the questions put to him were the following. If you came to discover anything wrong or unjust to be done under the order, what line would you take? Will you and can you regard the good of the order as your own good? Will you give our secret society the right of life and death? Do you bind yourself to absolute and unreserved obedience? And do you know the force of this undertaking? By way of warning as to the consequences of betraying the order, a forcible illustration was included in the ceremony of initiation. Taking a naked sword from the table, the initiator held the point against the heart of the novice with these words: If you are only a traitor and a perjurer, learn that all our brothers are called upon to arm themselves against you. Do not hope to escape or to find a place of safety. Wherever you are, shame, remorse, and the rage of our brothers will pursue you and torment you to the innermost recesses of your entrails. It will thus be seen that the liberty vaunted by the leaders of the Illuminati had no existence, and that iron discipline was in reality the watchword of the order. A great point impressed upon the adepts, of which we shall see the importance later, was that they should not be known as Illuminati. This rule was particularly enforced in the case of those described as enrollers. Women were to be used and fools with money. Women were also to be enlisted as Illuminati by being given hints of emancipation. Through women, wrote Weishaupt, one may often work the best in the world. To insinuate ourselves with these and to win them over should be one of our cleverest studies. More or less, they can all be led towards change by vanity, curiosity, sensuality, and inclination. From this one can draw much profit for the good cause. This sex has a large part of the world in its hands. The female adepts were then to be divided into two classes, each with its own secret. The first to consist of virtuous women who would give it an air of respectability to the order. The second of light women, who would help to satisfy those brothers who have a penchant for pleasure. But the present utility of both classes would consist in providing funds for the society. Fools with money, whether men or women, were to be particularly welcomed. These good people, wrote Spartacus to Ajax and Cato, swell our numbers and fill our money box. Set yourselves to work. These gentlemen must be made to nibble at the bait, but let us beware of telling them our secrets. This sort of people must always be made to believe that the grade they have reached is the last. 15 through 16. System of universal spying. Espionage formed a large part of Weishaupt's program.
While
The adepts known as the Insinuating Brothers were enjoined to assume the role of observers and reporters. Every person shall be made a spy on another and on all around him, friends, relations, enemies, those who are indifferent. All without exception shall be made the object of his inquiries. He shall attempt to discover their strong side and their weak, their passions, their prejudices, their connections, above all, their actions. In a word, the most detailed information about them. All this is to be entered on tablets that the insinuant carries with him, and from which he shall draw up reports to be sent in twice a month to his superiors, so that the order may know which are the people in each town and village to whom it can look for support. 16. Anti-science and civilization in general. Sciences are, quote, the complicated needs of a state contrary to nature, the inventions of vain and empty brains. Sent, quote, apostles. Beruel the Fourth, 9. From the first year of his Illuminism, Weishaupt's, in his atrocious impiety, aping the God of Christianity, he conceived in these terms the orders he would give to Mazenhausen to propagate his new gospel. Did not Jesus Christ send forth his apostles to preach throughout the universe? You who are my Peter, why would I allow you to be idle and quiet at home? Go then and preach. Martinism also important. 1775, quote, Saint Martin called liberty, equality, fraternity the sacred ternary. In the book of Saint Martin, Des Erreurs et de la Vérité, published in 1775, the formula liberty, equality, and fraternity is referred to as la ternaire sacrée. The Martinistes, frequently referred to in French contemporary records as the Illuminés, were in reality dreamers and fanatics and must not be confounded with the order of the Illuminati of Bavaria that came into existence 22 years later. It is by this terrible and formidable sect that the gigantic plan of world revolution was worked out under the leadership of the man whom Louis Blanc has truly described as the profoundest conspirator that has ever existed. Why
We were
short?
hearing about Blanc yesterday, weren't we?
C. 1782 Congress of Wilhelmsbad. Illuminism and Freemasonry united to pursue common end, claiming 3 million members. Quote on Tragic Secret,
A lot more
Webster,
now.
page 19. But it was not until the Congrès de Wilhelmsbad that the alliance between Illuminism and Freemasonry was finally sealed. This assembly, of which the importance of the subsequent history of the world has never been appreciated by historians, met for the first time on the 16th of July, 1782, and included representatives of all the secret societies,
This is Blanc.
Martinistas, as well as Freemasons and Illuminati, which now numbered no less than 3 million members all over the world. Amongst these different orders, the Illuminati of Bavaria alone had formulated a definite plan of campaign, and it was they who henceforward took the lead. What passed at this terrible Congress will never be known to the outside world, for even those men who had been drawn unwittingly into the movement, and now heard for the first time the real designs of their leaders, were under oath to reveal nothing. One such honest Freemason, the Comte de Verrue, a member of a Martiniste lodge at Lyons, returning from the Congrès de Wilhelmsbad, could not conceal his alarm, and when questioned on the quote, tragic secrets he had brought back with him, replied, I will not confide them to you. I can only tell you that all this is very much more serious than you think. The conspiracy which is being woven is so well thought out that it will be, so to speak, impossible for the monarchy and the church to escape from it.
Hmm.
From this time onwards, the Comte de Verrue could only speak of Freemasonry with horror. D. 1784. Elector of Bavaria prohibited all secret societies. 1785 Illuminati arrested and tried and their documents publicized. Recipes for bombs, description of the goal. Webster, 45. Public opinion had now, however, become thoroughly roused on the subject of the society, and the Elector of Bavaria, informed of the danger to the state constituted by its adepts, who were said to have declared that the Illuminati must in time rule the world, published an edict forbidding all secret societies. In April of the following year, 1785, four other Illuminati, disgusted by the tyranny of Weishaupt, were summoned before a court of inquiry to give an account of the doctrines and methods of the sect. The evidence of these men left no further room for doubt as to the diabolical nature of Illuminism. All religion, they declared, all love of country and loyalty to sovereigns were to be annihilated. A favorite maxim of the order being, "Tu le roi et tu le prêtre sont des fripons et les traiteurs." Moreover, every effort was to be made to create discord not only between princes and their subjects, but between ministers and their secretaries, and even between parents and children, whilst suicide was to be encouraged by inculcating in men's minds the idea that the act of killing oneself afforded a certain voluptuous pleasure. Espionage was to be extended even to the post by placing adepts in the post offices who possessed the art of opening letters and closing them again without fear of detection. Robinson, who studied all the evidence of the four professors, thus sums up the plan of Weishaupt as revealed by them. The order of the Illuminati adjured Christianity and advocated sensual pleasures. In the lodge's death was declared an eternal sleep. Patriotism and loyalty were called narrow minded prejudices and incompatible with universal benevolence. Further, they accounted all princes usurpers and tyrants, and all privileged orders as their abettors. They meant to abolish the laws which protected property accumulated by long continued and successful industry, and to prevent for the future any such accumulation. They intended to establish universal liberty and equality, the imprescriptible rights of man, and as necessary preparations for all this, they intended to root out all religion and ordinary morality, and even to break the bonds of domestic life, by destroying the veneration for marriage vows, and by taking the education of children out of the hands of the parents. Reduced to a simple formula, the aims of the Illuminati may be summarized in the following 6 points. 1. Abolition of monarchy and all ordered government. 2. Abolition of private property. 3. Abolition of inheritance. 4. Abolition of patriotism. 5. Abolition of the family, i.e., marriage and all morality, and the institution of the communal education of children. 6. Abolition of all religion. Now it will surely be admitted that the above forms a program hitherto unprecedented in the history of civilization. Communistic theories had been held by isolated thinkers or groups of thinkers since the days of Plato, but no one, as far as we know, had ever yet seriously proposed to destroy everything for which civilization stands. Moreover, when, as we shall see, the plan of Illuminism, as codified by the above 6 points, has continued up to the present day to form the exact program of the world revolution, how can we doubt that the whole movement originated with the Illuminati or with secret influences at work behind them? It was on the 11th of October 1786 that the Bavarian authorities descended upon the house of Zwack and seized the documents which laid bare the methods of the conspirators. Here were found descriptions of a strong box for safeguarding papers which, if forced open, should blow up by means of an infernal machine, of a combustion which should blind or kill if squirted in the face, of a method for counterfeiting seals, for poisonous perfumes that would fill a bedroom with pestilential vapors, and for a tea to procure abortion. A eulogy of atheism entitled Better Than Horace was also discovered, and a paper in the handwriting of Zwack describing the plan for enlisting women in the two classes mentioned above. It will be of great service and procure much information and money, and will suit charmingly the taste of many of our truest members who are lovers of the sex. It should consist of two classes, the virtuous and the freer hearted. They must not know of each other, and must be under the direction of men, but without knowing it, through good books, and the latter class, through the indulging of their passions in concealment. The fearful danger presented by the Illuminati now became apparent. And the government of Bavaria, judging that the best manner of conveying a warning to the civilized world would be to allow the papers to speak for themselves, ordered them to be published forthwith and circulated as widely as possible. A copy of this publication, entitled Original Writings of the Order of the Illuminati, was then forwarded to every government of Europe, but, strange to say, attracted little attention, as the Abbe Baruel pointed.
You know that document he's talking about? Those original writings from the Illuminati? I've definitely thought about just reading from those, like, because I think I have a text of it somewhere. Um, but you're right, yeah, it is humanism. Exactly what they're pushing.
Out that the extravagance of the scheme therein propounded rendered it unbelievable, and the rulers of Europe, refusing to take Illuminism seriously, put it aside as a chimera. C. The Revolution. 1. Calling of STS Gen because of financial difficulties. The pretext for Enlightenment ideas to work. The revolution was radical from the beginning and had immense support from the quote, spirit of the age. Wordsworth. Bliss was it in that scene to be alive, but to be young was very heavenly. 2. Jacobins. Took the lead from the beginning, the only real party. Agreed beforehand on policy in National Assembly. Well organized. 406 affiliated societies in the provinces with 500,000 members by 1793. They take control. Power from secret societies. Barrywell 4, 1 through 2. Conceived not many years before the Revolution, in the thoughts of a man whose total ambition seemed absorbed in Ingolstadt and the chalk dust of schools. How is it that Illuminism, in less than 20 years, became that formidable sect which, under the name of Jacobins, counts today as its trophies so many altars fallen to pieces, so many scepters broken or mangled, so many constitutions overturned, so many nations subjugated, so many potentates fallen under its daggers or its poisons or its executioners, so many other potentates humiliated beneath the yoke of a servitude called, quote, peace, or of a servitude even more dishonorable called, quote, alliance. Under this same name of Jacobins, swallowing up simultaneously all the secrets, all the conspiracies, all the sects of sworn infidels, of seditious plotters, of disorganizing plotters. How is it that Illuminism sets up such a dominion of fear that, holding the universe in dismay, it permits not a single king to say, "Tomorrow I will still be king," and not a single people, "Tomorrow I will still have my laws and my religion," not a single citizen, "Tomorrow both my fortune and my home will still be mine. Tomorrow I will not awaken beneath the tree of liberty on the one side and the tree of death, the ravenous guillotine on the other." Invisible authors. How is it that the secret adepts of modern day Spartacus alone preside at all the crimes, at all the disasters of this plague of brigandage and of ferocity called revolution? How do they still preside over all that the sect plans in order to consummate the desolation and dissolution of human societies? The Jacobins' orders were instantly obeyed. Barruel 4, 337. They drink each other's blood to the death of kings. Western fall of monarchy in 1792. Destruction begins in earnest. I found the letter. It was composed in these terms: "Your letter, my dear friend, has been read in presence of the whole club. It was surprising to find so much philosophy in a village curate. Never fear, my dear curate. We are 300. We mark the heads and they fall. As for that of which you speak, it is not time yet. Only keep your people ready. Dispose your parishioners to execute the orders, and they shall be given to you in time." This letter was signed Dietrich, Secretary. To the reflections which this letter suggests, I shall add only that the club from where it was sent has changed the place of its meetings to go to the suburb of Ste Honore, and that there it remained unknown to the court until the moment of one of these orgies, whose object would be to gain a prize the king of the fate that awaited him. After one of these repasts, celebrated in the name of fraternity, all the brothers would prick their arms and drain their blood into their glass. All would drink of this blood, after having cried, "Death to the kings." And this would be the last toast of their fraternal repast. This letter tells us also which men formed this legion of the 1200, which John de Brie proposed to establish at the convention, whose goal was to be spread into the empires to assassinate all the kings of the earth. 3. Violence. The usual interpretation: incidental passions aroused, national defense, etc. But evidence points to deliberate use. When there are real grievances, they are exploited by clever politicians to promote the revolution. Great role of agitators. 1. The Great Fear, July 1789, Born, page 100, Web 32 through 33. To whatever agency we attribute it, however, the mechanism of the French Revolution distinguishes it from all previous revolutions. Hitherto, the isolated revolutions that had taken place throughout the history of the world can be clearly recognized as spontaneous movements brought about by oppression or by a political faction enjoying some measure of popular support, and therefore endeavoring to satisfy the demands of the people. But in the French Revolution, we see for the first time that plan in operation which had been carried on right up to the present moment, the systematic attempt to create grievances in order to exploit them. The most remarkable instance of engineered agitation during the early stages of the Revolution was the extraordinary incident known to history as the Great Fear, when on the same day, July 22nd, 1789, and almost at the same hour, in towns and villages all over France, a panic was created by the announcement that all brigands were approaching, and therefore that all good citizens must take up arms. The messengers who brought the news post haste on horseback in many cases exhibited placards headed "Edict of the King," bearing the words, "The king orders all chateaux to be burned down. He only wishes to keep his own." And the people, obedient to these commands, seized upon every weapon they could find and set themselves to the task of destruction. The object of the conspirators was thus achieved: the arming of the populace against law and order, a device which ever since 1789 has always formed the first item in the program of the social revolution. Protest of Women, October 5th, 1789. Women also dressed as men, many forced to go along. Number 2. The Reign of Terror under Robespierre, ostensibly invoked by foreign invasion, seeking enemies of the people inside. This means of governing communism. But deeper, there was a little publicized plan of depopulation. Report of the Committee of Public Safety, August 8th, 1795. Be peaceful. France has enough for 12 million men. All the rest will have to be put to death, which was 12 million. And then you will no longer lack for bread. Beruel 4, page 335. It was she, the sect, that extinguished even the affection.
That same thought was the mentality behind like the Holodomor, if I'm not mistaken, with the communists. So the mentality was like, well, we're lacking bread, so might as well just kill all these peasants. You know what I mean? And then the communists will say things like, "See, the economy was great. People were eating terrific at this period." It's like, yeah, because they killed, millions of people. It's ridiculous. Well, during the French Revolution, it was the guillotine, Dr. Guillotine.
Right, you had type of stuff with Marquis de Sade and all that kind of like the sort of sexual violence.
And you know what's so
Sort of,
interesting
yeah.
about the guillotine? This idea that it was humane to kill somebody that way. And that's why they did so many of them, because it was humane in their mind. So that's the product of humanism. You see, is
Yeah, there's a thing in Gnosticism as well about like like aborting babies and stuff is like a way of freeing the baby from the material shell. Right? It's like like some crazy where
right.
they get into some weird where they curse the flesh.
Insane, man. Because they see the material as being, evil, and they're trying to escape it. So killing the baby is an escape. You're actually doing it a favor in their worldview. But I mean,
Right.
that's
There's some things in Sabbateanism like that too, where it's like
sure.
you're doing a person a favor by torturing them, or so on and so forth.
Well, there's prophecies of the Antichrist that is sort of like his miracles are sort of like if you were to stab somebody, and then you remove the blade and say, "See, I helped you." See what I'm saying? Like that's the kind of healings
Right.
the Antichrist does.
Right. And that's kind of like like Hassan Saba, the guy who like led the Templars.
Yeah.
Right. He would perform this like sort of quote unquote magic trick, right, where he had like a board on the floor where he had a dude where his like head was like like the second part of his body was like covered up.
Right.
So he'd make it look like he beheaded the guy. Right.
Right.
But then he'd really do it. Like after bringing him back to life. So he'd be like, "Look, I control life and death, basically."
No, wow. That's insane. What a maniac. So he'd really kill the guy in the end, though. Jeez.
Yeah, I feel like some of these horror movies we're forced to watch like some type of ritual playing out. Right? Like, I don't know for sure, but like some of the horror movie directors actually got locked up for doing weird stuff like that. But yeah, it's interesting.
Hey, man, the truth be told, like I was looking into, the roots of plays. It's all rituals. That's all rituals, really. Old Roman rituals. That's where
Yeah.
acting comes from, and you're like acting.
Yeah.
The presence of the ancestor in some way, and you're manifesting the ancestor to act this thing out that happened in the past. So
Well,
that
what's weird is that the like horror and sci-fi are directly linked to the occult. because sci-fi, some people say the first sci-fi author is Edward Bulwer Lytton, who
Right.
wrote about the Vril, right?
Yeah.
And they'll say the first horror novel is actually Frankenstein
Yeah.
by Mary Shelley, whose dad was a basically an occultist that like drank out of a skull,
Correct.
like all this stuff. Is like a totally weird dude. And her whole Frankenstein novel is basically Isis and Osiris,
Yeah.
or whatever.
Father Seraphim Rose writes about Mary Shelley in his book, and kind of I think he connects the New Age movement with sci-fi, and all this. Like,
Oh yeah,
I mean, and he also like UFO phenomenon. All this stuff is sort of
oh yeah. A lot of it comes out of the Institute of the Noetic Sciences and all the stuff, and Crowley and stuff. Like I think Crowley talked about the gray aliens and stuff.
right. I feel like Crowley when he contacted Lamb or whatever like that. That sounds like a demon from a patristic understanding of what that could be. From our perspective, that's clearly it. But see, modern man doesn't have the patristic roots to understand how demons can take many shapes, and even they can seemingly have physical objects that end up disappearing, like cloaks and different things. Like within the patristic history, you learn like how the demons function, but for modern man, they don't have this, and they're dabbling with the occult, and man will believe anything, and the demons are going to play off anything and present any illusion man would believe. So if it's aliens from outer space, they'd gladly have you believe that, because then you're not thinking about what is actually this thing. And every time people that you look at, like History Channel talking about the shadow people with red eyes or something like that, it's like, yeah, that sounds like demons, because it is demons.
Red people. Good lord.
Yeah, crazy, bro.
Of a brother for his brother, of the child for his father. When the adept Shanir, at the sight of a brother delivered over to executioners, coolly replied, "If my brother is not in the sentiment of the revolution, let him be sacrificed." When the adept Philip brought in triumph to the Jacobins the head of his father and mother. This is the sect always insatiable for blood, which by the mouth of Marat demanded yet 270,000
You see this
heads,
picture
which
here?
before long could only be counted by millions.
Um,
She, the sect, knew it.
this hat here, I don't know if you see like where I'm pointing,
Right.
but that hat, that's like a Phrygian hat or something like that. I think that's what that's called. And let's see, let's see. I'll look this up. One moment. Phrygian cap. Okay, yeah, that's what it is. I'll show my screen real quick. So, one moment. Yeah, you see that? Phrygian cap. You feel me? And so it says the Phrygian cap, also known as the Tharcian cap and Liberty cap, is a soft,
Look like an elf. Like
yeah,
what the elves wear. Right?
straight up. It was worn by Thracians, Persians, Scythians, Medes, Trojans, Phrygians, after whom it is named. The oldest known depiction of the Phrygian cap is from the Persepolis in Iran. Although the Phrygian cap did not originally function as liberty caps, they became to signify freedom and the pursuit of liberty first in the American Revolution, then in the French Revolution, particularly as a symbol of Jacobinism, and in which context has also been called a Jacobin cap. Isn't that wild?
So there's a link to the French Revolution right there, right?
Right. Yep. Hello. 1 second.
Yeah, blessings to the people. Thank you guys for watching. Yeah, confess one baptism is laying down some heavy stuff in the chat. I appreciate you, man. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. Hit the like. This channel we're watching is Unseen Warfare, right? And yeah, he looks at the implications of the history of the church on modern events, right? And he explores different modern ideologies, right? Like occultism, communism, right? Millenarianism, right? He knows the science on a lot of things. So yeah, I've been talking to this dude for a long while. And a lot of our research converge on these areas, right? Looking at, the roots of, sort of the modern sort of spiritual malaise that we're facing. What you got, Gypsy?
No, I'm looking at this now. This is pretty interesting stuff, man. Revolutionary France. Okay. The Smurfs.
Right.
We got a Smurf wearing one. Gotta get it. Yeah, dude, they be wearing them. So it is confirmed. The Smurfs are the Illuminati. We figured it out today. It turns out.
Smurfs, hobbits, you know.
Okay.
Wow. What's going on with him? Got a
uh,
little muffin top. What's happening there?
that's funny. Okay.
All the secrets of its equality could only be accomplished in the greatest events by depopulating the world. And the sect which replied through Lebeau to the communes of Montauban, terrified for want of provisions. Never fear, France has enough for 12 million men. It is necessary that the rest, that is, the other 12 million Frenchmen, must be put to death, and then you will no longer lack bread. Report of the Committee of Public Safety, meeting of August 8th, 1775. Revolutionary Tribunal discussed reduction of population to 1/3 or 1/2. Committee of Public Safety calculated how many heads to have in each town and district. Drowned, guillotined, or shot, perhaps 300,000, of which only 3,000 nobles, most peasants and workers. At Nantes, 500 children of poor people were killed in one butchery. 144 poor women thrown into the river, etc. 3. Killings and destruction especially fierce. September 1792 massacres of priests and others in prisons, cannibalism and torture. The violence calculated and Marx's idea. Sayez replies, Barruel 4, 335. You speak to us always of our means, monsieur. It is the end, it is the object and the goal that one must learn to see. Saint Just. I will walk willingly with my feet in blood and tears, said Robespierre's coadjutor, Saint Just. And this, whether he admits or not, must be the maxim of every revolutionary socialist who believes that any methods are justifiable for the attainment of his end. 4. Babeuf. Conspiracy of the Equals. A. Disciple of Weishaupt, followed Robespierre's communist ideas, said population was the immense secret of the terror, claimed it took 1 million lives, formed his own Masonic organization for bringing about, quote, equality, a communist. Web 56. Unfortunately, the confusion of mind prevailing amongst the advocates of equality was so great that the meetings, which long before consisted of 2,000 people, became like a Tower of Babel. No one knew precisely what he wanted, and no decisions could be reached. It was therefore decided to supplement these huge assemblies by small secret committees. And here the scheme of social revolution was elaborated. Starting from the premise that all property is theft, it was decided that the process known in revolutionary language as expropriation must take place. That is to say, all property must be wrested from its present owners by force, the force of an armed mob. But Babeuf, while advocating violence and tumult as the means to an end, in no way desired anarchy as a permanent solution. The state must be maintained, and not only maintained, but made absolute, the sole dispenser of the necessities of life. In my system of common happiness, he wrote, I desire that no individual property shall exist. The land is God's, and its fruits belong to all men in general. Another, Babao Viste, the Marquis de Antoinelle, formerly a member of the Revolutionary Tribunal, had expressed the matter in much of the same words.
That's that kind of idea, I think, went into the mentality of the Soviets, or like the Bolsheviks when they kind of took over in Russia. And it's like, well, we're going to take all the farmland from the peasants. And then they take the farmland from the peasants, and there's nobody to work those farms. And then they run out of food, and they have to have, food imported in. And there's all this, they don't have enough food to feed the people because of this idealism and their utopian mindset that they assumed would work out on paper. It sounds so great, and this is going to work, but it's clearly demonic because all these deaths are associated with it. And then the mentality of the Bolshevik or the communists is that well, those deaths are necessary deaths, so they no longer look at a human being as being anything other than a means to an end, or something, or something that needs to get out of their way. It's very strange.
Yeah, and then post World War II, you have the sort of system, right, where you can have 24/7 365, right, sort of reusable land for farming, right, because they could sort of take the nitrogen and put synthetic nitrogen in the soil, right? So they had a way that they could sort of reuse the land. But even then, they had to compete with the system of international trade, right? Because they basically just made food stuff that was basically non-perishable, right? And so that contributes to international trade. And then if your economy is based on international trade and the regulations based on international trade, then you always have to produce more, right, in order to import more stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's like, I mean, large scale, technology sort of forces you to have a degree of socialism in the way you run your, economy, because you need sort of socialistic laws and central banks to fund the factories, right? So you can compete with the game of international trade. So it's sort of like a weird,
I think they
thing.
came to realize that, I think that what happened with the Soviets in the 80s is they realized like we're going to have to change mass, and they seen it as like we can no longer deal with not only the burden of I just think they seem like they'd have to move closer to a capitalist mindset. You know what I mean? In a capitalist, at least external, and that's what they've done. They've sold it. They sold it to the West that that communism has fallen, and now that. But I mean, I feel like, and I think Cooper said it. He said that this was all because to have a one world system, each sovereign nation has to be on an equal level, right? If and then the sovereignty of nations falls to the side, and then you have a global situation where everybody's has the same system. You can't have a system that's like totally, totalitarian, a dictatorship here, and then these people over here don't have that. You know what I mean? I feel like that's what, but not only that, but I think it was a business decision. I think this insane strictness that they used initially because they were, pulling as much resources they wanted out of Russia. They're changing that. Now they want to, turn Russia into this money making machine for them. I got something on that, by the way. So I'm going to go to that. And then I'm going to.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, look up Gazprom, right, where Putin basically, him and a bunch of Jays own this oil company. And that's why they basically are controlled opposition for NATO.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It's just a bunch of nonsense. Yeah. It's propped up.
Yeah. Which, he acts like he's this enemy of NATO, but that's not the case, man. That, there's a NATO base in Russia right now, that he made an excuse for, of course. Oh, that's helping us. It's like, oh yeah, I bet, after you've acted like they're the enemy and that the West is Satan and all that.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, and they said that in the U.S. too. They said Putin is the Satan. And what's interesting is if you go to the the show Alex Jones, exposed, right, on the Hour of the Time.
Yeah.
Right, where he basically exposes Alex Jones, right, as a fraud.
I know.
Who like hypes up fake media events so that people like go into like freak out mode and then cause like riots and shit because they think like time's running out, and he'll announce these crazy things. He'll say like, oh, this court case is going to announce this hearing and it's going to be blah, blah, blah. And, just to psych people out into a fake media event, just like they did on January 6th. Right. And basically like the thing is like, he's saying in the beginning of that, that like Putin's like he's the Satan, he's the worst guy in the world, and today
Yeah,
they'll act like he's a great hero. So it's
right.
like,
Absolutely. It's ever switching. It's ever changing. But now today, you're absolutely right. They say Putin's this great hero and everybody's all for it. But this is actually, I believe this is William Cooper here. This is a
Recognized
fascinating. This
after the Hungarian and Polish
absolutely
revolts
fascinating.
that the Stalinist practice of mass repression had severely damaged the system and that radical measures were necessary to restore it. It was then that they decided to transform the Stalinist system into a more attractive form of communist democracy. It was not in 1985, but in 1958 that the communist leaders accepted that their economic system was ineffective and lagging behind the West in productivity. It was then that they decided that it would have to be revived through the introduction of market incentives. It was then that the communist leaders realized that communism could not be spread abroad against a background of fear and mass repression, and that world communist victory could only be achieved by transforming the Soviet and other communist regimes into a form more attractive to the West. It was during 1958 to 1960 that the communist leaders envisaged the convergence of restructured and transformed capitalist systems, leading ultimately to one system of world government.
yeah,
World
what's weird
government. Taking account of the military strength of NATO,
Yeah, what's that?
the communist
is that
leaders
like
decided to build up their military strength.
is like the shit always seems to line up with political movements, and also philosophical movements, right? Like, for example, right, like you have Locke and Rousseau that are kind of like against kings, right? So they're like, oh, yeah, we don't want any kings and stuff. And then you got sort of, the students of Blavatsky who are basically promoting like Fabian socialism. So it's like, what he's saying seems to line up exactly because he's like, we can't implement Marxism by changing the economy of nations. We have to look at an international cultural upheaval. I
Right.
mean, so it's basically the same thing as cultural Marxism, right? Which is fascinating.
Absolutely terrifying. Actually.
Right, because you think like, oh, they just said that as a fluke, but then there's this entire world movement behind it, like at the Frankfurt School and in the Theosophical Society, and you got the fucking, you know,
Right,
you
but
know what I
it's
mean,
sold to
Basant and
you
all
as
this
if
shit.
it's not that, right? It's sold to you in this package that as if it's not cultural Marxism. You know what I mean?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I wasn't planning on looking into that confess one baptism, but yeah, we'll look
As a
into it.
guarantee of the success of their program of domestic reform and as a pressure weapon for disarmament negotiations with the West and the execution of their strategy of convergence. Accepting the necessity for stability in the political leadership of the USSR for the execution of the long-range strategy, the Soviet leaders rejected Stalin's practice of eliminating his rivals and reverted to Lenin's style of leadership. They solved the problem through the selection by the Central Committee of Nikita Khrushchev's successor in advance of Khrushchev's own retirement. Leonid Brezhnev had already been chosen in this way in July of 1960 when he was made president and was given a special briefing by the chairman of the KGB in preparation for the new responsibilities he would be assuming when Khrushchev stepped down. A common commitment to the long-range strategy itself became a factor in the prevention of further power struggles. Western experts failed to understand this because Khrushchev's retirement was deliberately misrepresented by the Soviet leaders to the West as his dismissal. In this and in other ways, The origin of the long-range deception strategy of perestroika was successfully concealed. Under the guidance of the party apparatus, special research studies were initiated and carried out from September 1957 onwards by the Soviet Academy of Sciences in preparation for the strategy. The party apparatus and its think tanks, the Higher Party School, and the Academy of Social Sciences employed the results of this research in seeking scientific and theoretical solutions to the primary domestic problems associated with the strategy. It was these think tanks which developed the scenarios for Soviet reforms and trained Soviet and Bloc Party leaders, such as Dubček, in the spirit and demands of the strategy. The KGB Institute and its research department conducted a number of special studies for the Central Committee. Among them were studies on new methods of neutralizing political opposition in the Soviet Union and disclosure of state secrets in the interest of strategy, which has an obvious connection with the present openness or glasnost, one feature of which is the disclosure of quantities of accurate information together with quantities of disinformation. Special studies of the economies and international relations of the leading capitalist countries were conducted by the Institute of World Economy and International Relations. The Institute paid close attention to the European common market and to clashes of economic interest between the United States, Western Europe, and Japan. The appointment of the director of this institute as a chief economic advisor to Gorbachev can be explained by the contribution made by the Institute to the strategy of perestroika. A special research organ, the Institute for the Study of the USA and Canada, was set up in 1960 in Moscow to meet the demands of the strategy. For almost the whole period of the strategy, the Institute, led by academician Georgy Arbatov, has studied in depth every major political, social, cultural, and racial problem in the United States. The Institute keeps a close watch on the workings of the executive, Congress, the press, political parties, and the more important religious organizations. Arbatov and his subordinates have established close relations with the American elite, cultivating many leading politicians, scientists, religious leaders, experts in Soviet affairs, journalists, and cultural figures through meetings in Washington and invitations to visit the Soviet Union. Soviet-American student exchanges have been used to study the workings of American institutions and to train Soviet experts in areas which have a bearing on the execution of the strategy. You may remember that William Jefferson Clinton was one of those chosen for the Soviet-American student exchange program. For instance, Alexander Yakovlev, Gorbachev's key advisor on international policy and the promotion of perestroika in the American media, studied the media at Columbia University on an exchange program.
Wow.
The Soviet embassy in Washington has played a special role in studying the inner workings of American policy formulation and providing advice to Soviet strategists. A significant novelty was introduced into the work of the Soviet ambassador to the United States. In the interests of the strategy, Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin was made chief KGB resident in Washington in order that the diplomatic work of the embassy could be fully coordinated with the exploitation of the assets of the KGB residenture, especially its important agents of influence among politicians, businessmen, scientists, and of course, Western journalists. Anatoly Golitsyn prepared a special memorandum on Anatoly Dobrynin for the CIA, which confirmed Dobrynyn's use of KGB agents along strategic lines. The late Mr. James Angleton concluded that the memorandum should be published in declassified form in order to neutralize Dobrynyn's political influence in Washington and have him expelled for interference in the internal affairs of the United States. The findings of the memorandum were, however, disregarded after the Watergate hearings, which destabilized the American intelligence and counterintelligence services. In accordance with a party decision, the KGB was assigned a key role in the execution of the strategy. In 1959, the KGB, under Alexander Shelepin, was instructed to employ its intelligence and security assets, not for mass repression, but in the interests of strategy against the main enemy. Its main task became the neutralization and dissolution of genuine political opposition by nationalists and anti-Soviet intellectuals. Let me read that again to you. Its main task became the neutralization and dissolution of genuine political opposition by nationalists and anti-Soviet intellectuals. The KGB was ordered to create controlled political opposition and to introduce it to Western intelligence services along the lines of Dzerzhinsky's trust. As this Mr. Golitsyn revealed in the early 1960s, the KGB began the creation of a controlled dissident movement with a skillful, controlled dispute between liberal writers like Alexander Tvardovsky, Yevgeny Yevtushenko, and Nikolai Voznesensky, and conservatives like Vsevolod Kochetov. The KGB recruited and developed important agents of influence, allied with the dissidents among leading Soviet scientists like Andrei Sakharov and Peter Kapitsa. It was no accident that modern dissident prisoners at this time were allowed by the KGB to become visible and famous and to be monitored by human rights groups in the West, unlike the totally isolated and unheard of inmates of Stalin's prisons who simply perished without trace. It is important to note that famous dissidents achieved a high public profile before the advent of glasnost, or openness. The task of agents of influence, like the late Andrei Sakharov, is not a propaganda one. It is to act as assistants in the execution of the strategy of Soviet reform and convergence with the West.
Yep.
The KGB further recruited a number of theater and movie directors, writers, and journalists, and unofficially encouraged them to experiment with formerly taboo and controversial subjects like repression, prison life, rehabilitation, and questions of conscience and religion. The object of these experiments was to prepare these chosen individuals for the role of initiators and catalysts in the forthcoming controlled liberalization of the Soviet regime. The KGB reoriented its old agents among Soviet religious leaders, the KGB's Gapons, and used their influence to help convergence with the Western churches. Convergence with the Western churches. The KGB benefited from the experience of exploiting religious leaders under Stalin in the Second World War, and in the 1960s they employed that experience on a larger scale and with greater sophistication. The KGB, the party, the press, and even the courts have been used for the calculated public exposure of dissidents and their activities in the West as examples for the education and re-education of Western anti-Soviet intellectuals. On the initiative of the KGB, an army of Soviet vigilantes 5 million strong, the so-called Druzhiny, was recruited from among the Komsomol activists. Their units were led by retired Chekists. They have been patrolling and policing the streets of all the Soviet cities. Their primary task has been to prepare the Soviet people to behave during the forthcoming liberalization of perestroika. Soviet psychiatry and the incarceration of active anti-communists in psychiatric hospitals have been used to educate and intimidate the population into further submission to the regime by demonstrating that only the mentally abnormal protest against it. The party has also used détente with the West as a weapon against Soviet anti-communists, arguing that anti-communism in the Soviet Union is hopeless because even the West accepts the Soviet system. The communist press obtained maximum mileage from the American failure to help the Czechoslovaks when their party-controlled democratization, in fact, ran out of control in 1968. This had a sobering effect on genuine anti-communists in the Soviet Union and in Eastern Europe. Furthermore, for the purpose of dissolving genuine opposition, the KGB facilitated the selective immigration of individuals who were hostile to the system or who wished to join relatives abroad. All these KGB and party methods, together with the natural aging and death of Stalin's former victims, resulted in the disappearance of active anti-communists and the general acceptance of the regime by the Soviet population. By the 1980s, there were no social democrats or politically active nationalists left alive in the Soviet Union. By then, the KGB and the party apparatus had succeeded in creating conditions in which only they could form strong grassroots organizations, just as I've been telling you for years. And they're doing it here in the United States today. The KGB and the party conducted their preparations for perestroika in close cooperation with the parties and security services of the other communist countries. The successful preparation for perestroika by the KGB and the ministries of the interior of the Georgian and other national republics of the USSR explains the promotion of their heads, Alexander Shelepin, Yuri Andropov, Gaider Aliyev, Eduard Shevardnadze, Viktor Shebrikov, and Andrei Vlasov to the Politburo and other key strategic positions. Since 1959, the communist bloc parties and governments have been involved in political, practical experiments and rehearsals for separate elements of perestroika in different countries in preparation for its introduction overall. The most important of these experiments and rehearsals were an attempt at liberalization in the early 1960s under Khrushchev, publication of an article about market economics by Professor Yevsey Lieberman and experiments with firms and trusts in 1962, Alexei Kosygин's economic reforms in 1965, alleged Romanian independence from the early 1960s onwards, the Cultural Revolution in China, in fact, a campaign of ideological and political re-education and a preparation of the inexperienced and inept Chinese party bureaucracy for détente with the capitalist West, democratization in Czechoslovakia in 1968, legislation by the Polish Communist Party of Solidarity in 1980, and the introduction of capitalist incentives in China and Hungary during the 1970s and the 1980s. The Soviet strategists studied the performance, outcome, lessons, and mistakes of these experiments and rehearsals. No doubt, they drew proper practical conclusions from the excesses of the Cultural Revolution in China and the loss of control over the experiments with democratization in Czechoslovakia and solidarity in Poland. They probably also drew conclusions from the painful experiences of Yugoslavia. The experience gained was of enormous benefit for influencing the introduction of
Let's
perestroika
step away
and
for a
all its
second.
elements
I'm going to let
in
the
their
video
totality
play and let this
in the
go ahead
Union
and
of
go on.
Soviet Socialist Republics,
But I'll be back in like 5
known to
minutes.
most of you
Probably
as the
about
Soviet Union.
5. All right.
The development and execution of the strategy over a 30-year period,
Yeah, for sure, man.
Soviet power militarily,
Um,
politically,
do you want me to
and
let
with
this
Western help,
plane, or do you want to
economically.
present something else, or what?
Anatoly
Oh
Golitsyn
no, this is cool. In about 10 to 15 minutes, I do gotta go. Run and do my show. So
of the strategy
Okay, well,
was
in that
involving the
case,
political
I'm gonna
base
just shut
of
it
the
down
Communist
now.
Party
So
in
you
the
can go
Russian
ahead and get
and the other
done.
national republics.
yeah, if you want. Yeah. 'Cause
Okay.
I only got like 10, 15 minutes, pretty much.
Careful
But
preparation has created the
Well, I
conditions
appreciate
for
it, man.
overall
I appreciate
perestroika
everybody that
and
came
the
out. I
transition
appreciate you, man.
of the
Like I
regime in the most
enjoyed
powerful
presenting some
and
of this stuff.
experienced of the
Close
socialist
this real
countries
quick so I can
to a phase
get this
of
up here.
yeah, blessings, brother.
Yeah, man. I'll probably return with that again. Like next episode, I'll probably go back to that video. Like
Yeah.
yeah, and
Let me know.
through some more of this stuff that we've been covering, man. I appreciate it. And
Yeah, I'll look up some info for sure, dude. I like what this dude's saying in the chat. I confess one baptism. You should join us, man. Definitely a lot of info there. Blessings.
yeah, he's talking about we have monk Seraphim Zissis, and some preliminary notes on the influence of Freemasonry and early Greek ecumenism. I covered that very early on, actually, on my show here. I think I did an episode called True Orthodoxy and the New World Order, and I might have covered that text. I might have read directly from that text on that. But yeah, man, a lot of that stuff is great stuff, man.
Yes, deep. Looks like they investigated. Like they found a rat's nest. Basically.
Absolutely. Because that's where you would go, because that particular text is poignant, because it talks about how Freemasonry has influenced the situation in Greece for sure. So all right, well, I appreciate you, man. I appreciate everybody that came out, and I'm Unseen Warfare. I'll return soon, and this is The Machine Lies. He's got his own show. You should definitely try to subscribe and follow him. I think you're doing your show soon as well, right?
Right. It's on in like 20 minutes. So
Yeah.
So join me if you got time. But blessings, man.
Yeah. I'll try to make it there, and I hope everybody else that was here can too. All right, man. Later, brother.
Yeah, peace, guys. Yeah, peace, brother.
Later.
Yeah.